Okay, let's talk about Game Pass, a video game subscription service that has taken the gaming world by storm since its launch in 2017. With access to over 100 games and an affordable price point at just $10 a month, Game Pass has received almost universal acclaim by gaming critics, game journalists, and the video game community at large. It's very rare for you to hear any criticism against Game Pass, aside from PlayStation fanboys trying to start a platform war because Game Pass is obviously not available on PlayStation. Well, I'm not a PlayStation fanboy. I haven't played a PlayStation console in probably 4 or 5 years, and I have no plans on ever buying a PlayStation 5, so I am definitely no PlayStation fanboy. I am not even anti-Xbox. I actually am a Game Pass subscriber myself. Now, admittedly, I am only subscribed to Game Pass to have access to Xbox Live Gold and online multiplayer for my Xbox One, since, as you guys know, I do run a Call of Duty channel where most of my gameplay comes from the older COD games, like Black Ops 1, Modern Warfare 2, so I actually pay $15 a month for Game Pass Ultimate, and that's so that I can play more games on my channel and continue to play the Call of Duty games that I'm known for, and it makes me a good amount of money. I'm honestly doing it because it pays for itself, and I'm making a profit at the end of the day. At least 10 times returns on my investment, which I can't say the same for my cryptocurrency portfolio, but we'll get there one day. But it cannot be denied that Xbox Game Pass has an insanely high value proposition, unlike anything we have ever seen in the video game industry. And that's not just because of the back catalog of games that are offered in Game Pass. Obviously, all of the first-party games released by Microsoft over the past few generations, as well as the back catalog of EA games, recently Bethesda, which has been purchased by Xbox. There are so many great games made by Bethesda over the years, maybe not recent years, but over the years. But it's not just the back catalog of games that make Game Pass a great value, it's also the day one releases. Whether we're talking about Xbox Game Studios, Bethesda, or Activision, assuming Microsoft's purchase of Activision goes through, that will launch on Game Pass day one without you having to pay $60, $70 for each game. On the surface level, this all sounds great. Game Pass seems like a really good value, and it seems like a great way for people to play a lot more games for a lot less money. And of course, as we head into an economic recession, as games are getting more expensive, recently being raised from $60 to $70, that becomes a much more important thing for a lot more people. The ability to play more games for less money. In this video, I'm going to explain why Game Pass is actually one of the most significant threats to the video game industry that we have seen in many years, and why I'm ultimately hoping for the service to fail. Now, this is an opinion that I have held over the past few years since Game Pass really started to take off, and it's an opinion I still hold to this day, but something that becomes more and more important to discuss as these Netflix-style game subscription services become a lot more prevalent in the gaming industry at large. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, everyone who has ever praised Xbox Game Pass and has talked about how it's such a great thing, how subscription services are the future of gaming, and it's going to be a very good thing, a very positive thing for video games. Over the next few years, every single person that has patronized these game subscription services and allowed them to surpass the traditional style of playing games, which is to buy them at full price, you're all going to live to regret it in the future. There's two main reasons why I say this. One is going to be the lack of ownership of subscription titles. You know, once you stop paying for the subscription service, or if the subscription service ceases to exist, then what the fuck happens to your game? So that's one thing. Another thing is the actual quality of the games themselves will go down significantly. Games will become a lot less ambitious. They will have a much smaller budget because they're not going to make as much money off of subscription as they would with a $60, $70 price tag. And both of these things will lead to games being worse in quality and more expensive over time if Game Pass continues to grow and subscription services become more and more prevalent. So let's go to the first thing, ownership of games. Because I do predict, and I think this is really a foregone conclusion, as these subscription services become more prevalent, as these companies get more aggressive in growing their subscriber base in these services, there's going to be a time where games on Game Pass or in any other service become exclusive to said subscription service. So, for example, right now, with games like Halo Infinite, Gears of War, Starfield, which is coming out, and all these other games that, you can play day one on Game Pass without having to pay any extra fees. But you can also decide, you know what, I don't want Game Pass, I'm just going to pay the full price. I'm going to pay $70 for the game. Obviously, there's going to be a point where Microsoft's going to decide, no, you're no longer going to have the option of buying a physical disc of these games or buying a digital copy of these games. You can only play these games now through a Game Pass subscription. The subscription is now required in order to play any of these games at any point. So essentially, Microsoft's original vision of always online DRM back in 2013 will become a reality and will be fully embraced by the video game community because, well, Game Pass is such a great service, such a great value. The problem with that is that you will no longer have any ownership over any of your games anymore. Now, we've been moving towards this direction ever since the 7th generation, where digital games started to become prevalent and eventually became more prevalent than physical sales. And that was also driven by consumers finding it more convenient to buy games digitally than through a physical copy. And now, these days, even a physical copy, a lot of the time, will require internet in order to download and to play the full game. That's what happened with Spyro Reignited Trilogy and a number of other games. So even right now, the notion of game ownership is very laughable at this point. But with these subscription services, if they become the mainstream way of playing games, it's going to become even worse when it comes to video game preservation and video game ownership. Because I'll tell you guys a recent example of why I am very concerned about the future. So over the past couple of years, through EA Play being part of Game Pass Ultimate, I was playing Titanfall 1 on the Xbox One. I never played it back in the day in 2014 when it came out. I always wanted to check it out at some point, and through Game Pass, I finally had that opportunity. And I was playing it for a number of years, like 2 or 3 years, before EA decided we're no longer including Titanfall in our subscription services, and it's also being removed from the digital store. So it was no longer accessible on Game Pass or EA Play, and was no longer accessible on the Xbox digital store. So in order for me to continue playing it, I had to purchase a physical copy of Titanfall through eBay. So thanks to there being physical copies out there of Titanfall 1, I didn't lose access to the game forever. But what happens in the future when the physical market becomes completely phased out, which is the direction we're headed in with the PS5 digital edition, and sometime in the future they're going to make a digital-only Xbox Series X. So you're now having a lot more games just outright foregoing a physical release and just going all digital. That alone is a huge problem for the future of game preservation. But then when you get rid of digital also and make it tied only to a subscription service, you can't even buy it standalone, trying to preserve these games will just be a complete nightmare. Because what happens if a few years down the line, and this is the same thing that happened with Netflix. Netflix was pretty much the only game in town, right? And then you also had Hulu, and then you had Amazon Prime, and now you have a whole bunch of these movie, TV streaming services out there that if you pay for all of them, you actually end up paying more than you would with a cable subscription, which I find very funny. And we'll talk about cost very soon, but as far as just the actual lack of ownership goes, what happens when a game that you love, a game that you've been playing so much, gets tossed around between multiple subscription services, meaning you're playing it on Game Pass one day, and then it gets taken off of Game Pass. That we see that a lot right now. Games come to Game Pass a lot, but they also leave Game Pass a lot. And if you have this increased competition in the subscription service market, which you're obviously going to have if Game Pass continues to grow, then you're going to be fucked when a game that you loved and played so much all of a sudden becomes exclusive to a different service, and you can only play it on there. Now with TV shows, that happens a lot with streaming. For example, Friends left Netflix and is now exclusive to HBO Max, and you have that all the time with TV shows hopping around between different services. With video games, it becomes a lot more important because one thing, video games are a lot hard to pirate, so, at least with a TV show, if you really want to, you can find a way to watch it for free, you know what I mean? But with a video game, not so easy, especially with the always online DRM and that kind of stuff. But, another thing with that is that you're going to be committing a lot more hours, a lot more time. You're going to be a lot more dedicated to these video games that you have than a TV show that you watch. You know what I mean? Because video games are just so much more involved. They're a lot more complicated. There's a lot more things you could do with a video game. Like, you can play a game, but you watch a movie or a show. Like, it's just, video games are a lot more valuable than TV shows. I think we would all agree on that. But, yeah, what happens when said video game that you love and played so much gets taken away from you? Well, I guess you just have to pay for the other subscription service. Then there's another game that you played that is now exclusive to a third subscription service, and now another game that's exclusive to a fourth one and a fifth one, and so on and so forth. That's something that's happening right now with the TV and movie industry. But what happens when you have 5 or 6 different streaming services? Obviously, you're not going to pay for all of them because that would not be affordable for the average person, assuming they all have the same price as Game Pass at $10, $15 a month. And over the years, things are just going to get more expensive with inflation and all that they're going to raise prices, and you're going to pay, what, $15, $20 a month for a game streaming service? That would be like $100 a month, so over $1,000 a year. So that's another issue altogether, is that the value proposition is not going to last forever because everyone's going to have the same idea as Microsoft eventually and compete with them, and you're just going to have all these different services that you cannot realistically pay for. But if you start to have it where games are exclusive to certain streaming services, you'll actually be paying more for games in the future than you are right now. Over $1,000 a year, like I said. That's not if you just want to play every game that's out there, but even just have access to these games. Now, you could try to argue that, well, $1,000 a year to have access to any game out there doesn't seem too bad, since in order to have access to every game out there, you need to have a PlayStation console, which is $500 alone. You have to pay how many dollars a year? $60, $70 a year to play online just for PlayStation, to pay for $60, $70 for a game. So that's already what, like $700 just to have a brand new PlayStation console, a year of PlayStation Plus, and one game. But the thing with that is, you can see Sony right now, they're putting all their games on PC. At some point, all the games will be on PC for PlayStation. So I don't have to buy a PlayStation console right now, and I already have access to a great number of PlayStation titles. But as it stands right now, I do not pay more than like $200 a year for video games, because I mostly play older titles. I buy the games when they're on sale on Steam. So for me, it would definitely be a lot more expensive if, hypothetically, all the games out there are no longer purchasable digitally or physically. They're now all tied to a subscription service. And like I said, that's just inevitable. That's going to happen if subscription services become huge. Or at the very best, you'll have like half of the games that are ever made will be exclusive to subscription services. Either way, it's going to be shitty. Games are going to be more expensive overall than when they're just standalone releases for $60, $70. So with the lack of game ownership provided by subscription services, you as a consumer will have less rights and less options, and you'll be paying a lot more. Not to mention all the uncertainty that comes with the lack of ownership if hypothetically everything is now in the cloud and is through streaming and subscriptions. What happens if you're playing a single player game on Game Pass and you have a lot of progress in that game, or even an online multiplayer game also? Like, you just put so much time, so many hours into your progress, and then all of a sudden, the game leaves Game Pass and is now exclusive to a different service. Is Microsoft going to graciously let you transfer your data from their servers over to a competitor's servers? So that's another aspect entirely of why, this whole thing is very concerning, because we don't know the answer to any of that. We don't know how that's going to look if a game leaves a service and goes to a different one. For a TV show, you don't think twice. Oh, you subscribe to that service and that's it. But with gaming, it's obviously a lot more involved than that. And it matters a lot more because, again, like, you put all this time into that game. You don't want to lose everything and start all over again. So the lack of ownership provided by these subscription services is very concerning to me. That's one reason why I want Game Pass to fail. The other reason is the artistic integrity of games will go down significantly. The quality of the games themselves will be much, much lower through a subscription model than through a $70 price tag. As it stands right now, Xbox Game Pass has 25 million subscribers. That's at least as of January. It's probably grown since then, but let's say 25 million because that was the last number that has been officially reported. And let's say $120 a year, that's what it costs for a basic Game Pass subscription. Game Pass Ultimate is $180 a year. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that half of all Game Pass subscribers are subscribed to Ultimate and the other half are subscribed to regular Game Pass. And you have 25 million subscribers. That would mean that Game Pass would generate $3.75 billion in revenue per year, but obviously they're not making all of that in profit. There are going to be operating costs for the service itself, especially when we're talking about xCloud and streaming, which is a very expensive technology. Licensing fees when it comes to these third-party games that are being put on Game Pass, like the EA games, for example. And development costs when we're talking about the first-party games coming straight from Xbox or Bethesda or potentially Activision. And at the recent press conference, Microsoft announced that there are over 50 first-party Xbox games coming to Game Pass and, just coming out in general over the next year. Obviously, most of the games that you see are either indie games or games that have already been released years ago, so they don't cost as much to put them on there as a new game. But you also have games like Overwatch 2, Starfield, Dead Space, Minecraft Legends, Forza Motorsport. These are games that have very high costs. They cost a lot of money to develop and to market. If you look at Skyrim, for example, which came out over a decade ago, that game easily cost over $100 million when you're talking about marketing, when you're talking about development. Well, that was over a decade ago. Now, with Starfield, the development cost will easily be much, much higher because games are becoming more and more expensive to make over time. So I would say between marketing and development, Starfield will cost at least $200 million. So that would be about 1/20th of the total revenue that Game Pass makes in a year. Obviously, the revenue will increase, but also they're not making what they earn. Game Pass probably hasn't even turned a profit yet, just because of how much they're marketing it, because of how much it costs to get these games out there. And yeah, Starfield will be a game that it will be available for sale on Steam and on all these different platforms, but it's logically, if you want Starfield, you're going to get a Game Pass subscription. You're already a Game Pass subscriber. So they're not going to make a lot of money off of individual game sales, and like I said, eventually individual game sales will be phased out in favor of being exclusive to streaming or subscriptions, whatever you want to call it. Like, Game Pass will be the only way to play these games in the future. But the point I'm really trying to get at here is that Starfield alone is going to eat into a lot of the profits of Game Pass, and that's just one single game. And then when you get into Call of Duty, when you get into Halo, when you get into all these different games that are going to be launching day one on Game Pass, even if Game Pass's subscriber count doubles at some point, they're still not going to be in a sustainable situation with all these different games that are going to be launching day one on Game Pass. Even Modern Warfare 2, not the one that's coming out this year, but the one from 2009, cost $300 million to make, adjusted for inflation. That's what, 10% of Microsoft's total revenue from Game Pass? I mean, why do you think that they're going to continue to release Call of Duty on the PlayStation for the foreseeable future, so that PlayStation gamers can subsidize the costs of not just the game itself, but from Microsoft purchasing it for $69 billion. But their eventual goal is to make Call of Duty, to make Elder Scrolls and all these games exclusive to not just Xbox, but for Game Pass. I believe that Bethesda games are not coming out on PlayStation 5, but Activision games are, probably because, it's a bigger acquisition, and therefore it will be a lot longer for them to make their money back from that acquisition. So that's probably why Activision games are coming to PlayStation, but Bethesda games are not. Either way, it's going to be a long road before Microsoft even turns a single profit off of these acquisitions and off of Game Pass and all that. Yeah, if you think that these games are not going to cut a lot of corners when it comes to development, they're not going to be less ambitious and, have less content in the game, then you're delusional. Well, we already see it with Netflix, how they order all these different shows. A lot of them are very popular with the fans, that they have millions of streams, yet after 2 seasons they're canceled because Netflix cannot sustain having all these shows running at the same time because they just don't make enough money. And Netflix costs around the same amount of money as Game Pass, actually. I think it's up to like $14, $15 a month. It keeps increasing. But, TV shows cost a lot less to make than video games. That's one thing. And another thing is that Netflix has over 200 million subscribers worldwide, and you see them cutting corners, you see them cutting costs, cutting corners, canceling shows. If you don't think that Microsoft's going to do the same thing with Game Pass and a lot of these games that are going to be coming on at day one, then again, you're delusional. Because even if Game Pass successfully becomes the Netflix of games, you have 200 million Game Pass subscribers, which is probably unlikely to ever happen, but let's say that does happen. Again, games cost a lot more to make, by far, than a movie or TV show. To the point where Red Dead Redemption 2, the gameplay you're seeing throughout this video, is a game that cost around $550 million to make. There is no way in which Red Dead Redemption 2 can exist in a market where subscription services are the way that everyone plays their games. Because that $500 million cost is a third of what Netflix makes in a financial quarter. And Microsoft Game Pass is nowhere near the level of Netflix, and again, probably never will be, or, whatever service it might be, but there's going to be all these different services out there, so it's going to be split even more. And you're going to have even more competition that you probably never will have one single service that will surpass 100 million subscribers in the market. So yeah, $500 million for one game simply will not be sustainable at all. The more Game Pass continues to grow, the more prevalent it becomes, the more companies are going to want to get on this whole streaming thing and do something similar to Microsoft, where they're going to release all their games day one on their respective streaming service. I even think it's inevitable that Sony does the same thing. They're trying to compete with Game Pass, but they're still committed to having standalone releases, similar to kind of like how you have movies that release in the box office and then a few months later or a few years later come over to streaming. Sony has that mentality, but I think that the more Microsoft makes, the more subscribers they get, the more, big that Game Pass gets, Sony's going to become more and more pressured to have a real answer to Game Pass, which will include putting games like God of War, putting games like The Last of Us, etc., on their PlayStation Plus or PlayStation Now, whatever their service would be called, day one on that service. And what's going to happen as a result? The quality of the games, the quality of their first-party games will go down significantly, because Sony is a company that's known for creating high-quality exclusives that everybody wants to play. As far as their first-party development goes, they have a much better reputation than Microsoft. But if Microsoft is doing a lot better than Sony ever could with the subscription, Sony's going to do what they got to do to remain relevant in the market. And that means that these games are going to have a lot less content, a lot less of a budget, because at the end of the day, even if you have 20 million, 50 million subscribers, you're not going to be able to sustain the cost of each and every one of these games and make as much money as you did before when they did cost $60, $70 per game. I have a feeling that people just might not care. If the quality of games go down, they're still paying for them at a bargain for $10, $15 a month, that they're still getting a value out of said game, even if it may not be as fleshed out as they would hope to be. But, they're paying a flat subscription rate to have access to over 100 games, that their expectations are going to be so much lower than if they were to pay for that individual game at $70. And eventually people might just become complacent and be like, it is what it is. This is what gaming is, but whatever, They may not be quality games, but there's a huge quantity of games that I can play with my subscription. So, if the game sucks, I'm going to move on to a different game that I can play through my subscription. Now, you could correctly argue that, well, despite games going up from $60 to $70, they haven't become more ambitious. They haven't gotten better over time. Modern gaming has gotten worse, but I'll just simply add that, well, with these subscription services, with services like Game Pass being out there and becoming more and more big, it's going to get a lot worse as far as games being less ambitious, less risk-taking, and less fun. Now, I have noticed that with a lot of these Game Pass games, DLC is not included with your Game Pass subscription. The Outer Worlds, for example, was a game released by Obsidian that was published day one on Game Pass and had DLC released later down the line, but you had to pay for that separately and was not included with Game Pass. So I think there's a possibility that these game publishers might find a way around it where overall the game will be good, but you're going to still have to pay more to get the full experience. So you'll start off with a half-decent game with your Game Pass subscription, but at the end of the day, if you want to get more out of your experience, you're going to have to pay for DLC. We have seen DLC kind of become a lot less relevant over the past few years in favor of live services and microtransactions and whatnot. Like Call of Duty used to be one of the biggest offenders of releasing DLC all the time. They haven't released DLC for their games in 4 years, but I suspect that that might change with it coming to Game Pass, because they're not going to make as much revenue off of Call of Duty with it being a Game Pass title rather than it being a $60, $70 title. So they're either going to cut down on their ambitions of what the game is going to be and make it a lot less sophisticated and a lot more simplistic and give you a much more watered down experience than what you're used to, or they're going to make up the difference with DLC that you'll have to pay for separately. Either way, I think you're going to be paying a lot more money for your games than you are right now. If these services take off, if Game Pass takes off and gets 50 million, 100 million subscribers, all these other companies are going to want in on it. EA, Ubisoft, Sony, Nintendo, they're all going to release their very own subscription services to compete against Microsoft. So in order to get all these games, you're going to have to pay a lot more. And in order to access all these games, not even play them, but to have the ability to play them, you're going to have to fork over all the money for all the subscription services, and to get all the content, you're going to have to pay extra for DLC. That's what I think the future is looking at this current point in the video game industry, as long as Game Pass continues to sustain growth, and as long as members of the gaming community are on board with this whole subscription model and think it's the greatest thing to ever happen since sliced bread. At some point, those people will be in for a very rude awakening. I'm someone that actually likes the idea of a subscription service in practice. Like, I am a subscriber of EA Play. I've been subscribed to them for a number of years. The whole Titanfall 1 thing I talked about earlier, though, really pissed me off. Like, why are you going to take a game that you own off your subscription service, just for no reason? They say, it's because the game is hacked and unplayable, but I'm able to play it just fine with no hackers. Anyway, regardless of that, having a subscription EA Play is only $30 a year, and it has the entire back catalog of EA for the most part. I don't think they have Medal of Honor. There's a few games they don't have, but they have a huge chunk of the EA catalog, and it's only $30 a year. So I'm happy with that service. Once you get into territory where you're talking about day one releases and having all the games release on a subscription service, that's when you kind of lose me, and I start to get concerned, because there is absolutely no way in which you don't start to get games that are only playable on the subscription service, and that you don't have games become more watered down as a result of them being on a subscription service. That's something people do not understand. That's something people do not really think about, because they just see, $10 a month, it's so awesome, I have all these games. But they don't see the bigger picture here. So we'll see how the future goes, but it's not looking very bright. I think the only way we do have an optimistic future here is if these subscription services are killed off and do not succeed. But that's looking less and less likely over time, unfortunately.